And welcome to the talk. My name's John Shier. Some of you might have seen me earlier on doing the keynote with Chester. And we didn't really introduce each other, so let me do that now just to give you a bit of an idea of what I do at Sophos. I do security research, but unlike the folks in our labs, the really smart, switched-on folks that try to protect against malware, I kind of look at the security landscape as just the general discipline and try to understand what's happening, what are the trends that we're seeing, what are cyber criminals up to, what might they be up to tomorrow, those kinds of things. Kind of synthesize that information and then try to bring it to community events like this, talking to our partners or customers and speaking at other security conferences. So as you probably read in the talk description, we're going to talk about law enforcement operations against Darknet markets. And specifically, we're going to talk about markets like Alphabay and Hansa, which at the time were two of the biggest, drug peddling markets on the dark web. And then we'll kind of round out the top three by talking about Dream. And then along the way, I'm going to have to explain a little bit about, what they are, how they work, for those of you who haven't been on the dark web and, don't really know how it all works. It isn't as scary as it sounds, and it is quite simple. But there's a little bit of nuance there, and we'll talk about some of the OPSEC failures that really led to a lot of the stories I'm going to tell today. And what can be fun about doing this kind of research is you kind of never know what's going to happen between the time when you think about doing the research and you come up with a talk and you kind of pitch these things, and then when you actually deliver the talk. The dark web is a very dynamic place in many respects, and stuff happens all the time. From day to day, a site might be up one day, it might be down the next, it might be up 1 minute and down the next as well. And so, I was stymied a couple times while doing this research, but it actually made for a better story. What this talk is not going to be about, however, is just the moral and ethical implications of what these markets are peddling. That is very much subjective, but if we can just all agree that what they were doing is pretty much illegal in just about every country on the planet, we'll stick to that. And before we get to the main event, we need to talk a little bit about Silk Road. So, Silk Road, as many of you may remember, is probably the first darknet market that kind of rose to popularity and became massively successful in terms of its appeal outside of the dark web. And it was founded in 2011 by Ross Ulbricht. And it was founded as a sort of an expression of the philosophy of agorism and counter-economics. So basically, screw the government, right? It's a libertarian ethos. I can do whatever I want. Don't get in my way. And Silk Road was the first darknet market that gained massive popularity, but it also showed the way how to other markets what was possible out there. The kinds of things that the types of security they were using, the types of just even the code that they were using, but also it was one of the very first adopters, one of the early adopters of things like vendor reputation systems and payment escrow systems, which back in the day weren't really a thing. One notable aspect about Silk Road, and I managed to get some screenshots a long time ago, was the policy that only goods and services which did not harm or defraud were allowed on the site. And this applied to things like child sexual exploitation material, services based on violence, and goods that were used to aid and abet fraud like carding and stolen identities. Now, this wasn't always the case, right? So some things did sneak in there every once in a while, but those were at least what the terms of service stated. And in keeping with that libertarian ethos of do no harm to others, the site focused mostly on drugs and drug paraphernalia. Now, there were only illegal goods on Silk Road. There were legal ones too. So you could get things like jewelry and books and artwork, sporting goods and war memorabilia and replicas. Now, according to some, Silk Road contributed to the rise of Bitcoin. So, Bitcoin was kind of still a very young cryptocurrency at the time. And prior to Silk Road, other markets didn't actually rely on cryptocurrencies for purchases. They would accept things like PayPal and Western Union transfers. Now, that ultimately led to a lot of those markets' downfalls because the feds were able to do, just basically follow the money quite easily and in plain sight and get to the individuals that were behind some of these things. But Silk Road was a Bitcoin-only market, and the large transaction volume that Silk Road was generating actually helped pump up the Bitcoin price somewhat. And when Silk Road was seized on 2 October 2013, there was a rather profound, as we can see here in the chart, albeit brief and short-lived impact on the price of Bitcoin. Now, it didn't take long for other people to notice what was happening with things like Silk Road, and people wanted to cash in on the action. So in about mid-2013, we started seeing a lot more markets open up on the dark web. So the second thing we need to talk about is just how these markets operate, right? How do they make their money? Some of the markets that are still around today are following the path or the blueprint that was laid down by Silk Road way back in the day. And they also kind of support that libertarian ethos as well of basically only selling drugs and do no harm to others. Actually, that's why we're seeing a lot of markets nowadays banning things like fentanyl, right? Because fentanyl has been associated with a lot of deaths, especially with the opioid epidemic in the US. And so they want to stay largely away from that. The majority of the more popular markets today, they just actually sell anything to anyone. Drugs, weapons, hacking services, malware, counterfeit goods, you name it. The only thing that most of these markets prohibit is child sexual exploitation material and sometimes murder. Sometimes. So as we can see from Government Exhibit 113A that was entered by the prosecution in Ross Ulbricht's trial, this is the way that most markets make their money to this day. It's basically a supply and demand equation, right? So a vendor will place an ad. So if I just scroll back, right? These are all ads for products that are available. A vendor will place an ad on a market, and as a buyer who's interested in one of those ads, you would simply click on it, click buy, and then what you need to do is you need to take your real money, exchange it for fake money, and then you take that fake money and you buy the product. Buying the product means you take your Bitcoins, it goes into what's called an escrow account, and that is an account that is holding the funds so that the vendor then has time to deliver the product, and if you're satisfied that the transaction was complete, then you notify that, yes, I did receive my whatever, and then the vendor will then get their cut of the money. But also the market will take a commission. So that's how these markets operate. They basically take a cut of every single transaction, just kind of like the App Store, right? Or the Play Store, of every single transaction that goes through these markets. So if you're buying 100 quid worth of cocaine, Silk Road takes 2% and the vendor gets the rest. And most markets today still have this commission, scenario, and it's generally around 2 to 6%. There are other ways to make money. So, as far as markets being concerned, these are the rules for becoming a vendor on a fairly popular alphabet clone right now that's in operation currently called Empire Market. And there's the usual rules about things like no child sexual exploitation material, murder for hire services, no doxing users, and no selling outside the market. That's a big no-no with these guys, because once you sell outside the market, then they don't get their cut and they get really upset. Empire also charges a vendor fee. In this case, it's a USD $300 bond. Basically, just keep the scammers away, right? The security for these guys is also a top priority, right? They want you to make sure that you have a PGP key and that 2FA is mandatory for all of the vendors on their site. So just imagine if like Facebook had terms of service like this. It'd be great, right? And here are the rules for another relatively new market called Nightmare. Nightmare's, I think it's been about a year now since it's been in full operation. And we see, much of the same rules as Empire, but here they only charge a $250 bond. And if you maintain what they call, 100% fair dealing rating, you get that back after 3 months. So fair dealing basically means, you've got no strikes against you. All the buyers have reported that you're a reputable vendor and they like your services, and you didn't dox anybody and you didn't go outside the market. And the number one rule, though, if you look at the very top, right, there'll be no shenanigans against Russian citizens. As a matter of fact, they're so adamant about this that they felt the need to put it in there twice. So I wonder where they're from. Lastly, there's some other kind of creative ways that you can make money as a darknet market. The Empire market used to run, so this is one of these things where this was active originally, and then now it's been defunct for a little bit. But they used to run a lottery that basically for the low fee of the equivalent of $1, you enter into this lottery, you pick some numbers, and if your number comes up at the time, you could win just a little over $8,000. So just another money generating scheme. However they can get the money, they will do it, and off we go. So what makes these markets come and go? There's a variety of reasons. And this is a big chart, but we're going to kind of work our way from the top, working our way down. This chart tracked 87 markets over the course of about 6 years. So the length of the colored bar, the thick colored bar, indicates how long the market was in operation for. And the color indicates the reason why it is taken down, or why it disappeared, for example. So at the very top of the chart, we see the original Silk Road 1. It's coded in green, which means that it was taken down by law enforcement. It's followed by something called Black Market Reloaded in gold, which allegedly suffered a hack that forced the market to shut down. Now, there's still some contention about whether that was actually the case. And then below that, there is Sheep Marketplace, which exit scammed. So an exit scam is, if you recall when I was talking about the escrow, imagine the amount of transactions that are potentially going through a lot of these markets. There could be a lot of Bitcoin sitting in those escrow accounts. An exit scam is simply the market operators just pull the plug on everything and take the Bitcoins that are in there, and off they go. So depending on the size of the market, obviously this can be quite a haul. The criminals behind Sheep Market made off with about $6 million when they exit scammed. And then shortly after Silk Road 1 was raided, Silk Road 2 came around, and it was run by a former moderator of the original Silk Road who basically just wanted to use the Silk Road name for, marketing and branding purposes, so he just called it Silk Road 2. And it only lasted about a year before it too was taken down by law enforcement. I think, as they were doing the investigations of Silk Road 1, they got a lot of individuals of interest, and they basically put the pieces together and found this guy as well. And then the pinky purple sort of by itself in the middle there, those are markets that voluntarily shut down for whatever reason. This means the administrators, they decided to shut down, but they let the users, they let the vendors, they let the buyers know that they were shutting down. They gave everybody ample notice and time to withdraw. So if you put a buy order in and it goes into escrow, you can, until the order's finalized, withdraw those funds. So they let the user withdraw the funds, and then they shut down. Agora was the market that shut down in this case. And then there was Evolution, which is the last one with the blue as well. And it exit scammed to the tune of $12 million. So it was basically Agora and Evolution were the two biggest markets during that time frame of darknet markets, and they were the most popular ones on the dark web. Okay, so just as with nature, the dark web abhors a vacuum, although I'm quite partial to my Dyson, made in Great Britain. So when those two markets went away, there was a need for another market to take their place. And really, this was the moment that Alphabet was waiting for. In the 3 days following Evolution's closure, Alphabet gained 18,000 new customers, and we're trading about $300,000 every single day. Alphabet was like many of the other ones that we saw previously, but also like many of the newer markets, it dealt in drugs, but you could also get yourself some digital goods. You've got things like, there's some Netflix accounts and all sorts of other things. But you could also get yourself some air miles accounts, right? So if you've ever wondered when an account gets phished, something like a BA account, where those credentials go, this is where they end up, right? So the criminals behind a phish like this would basically sell the accounts to whomever wants to buy them, and then you can just pilfer the air miles out of those accounts. But you could also get some luxury goods like these Yeezys. I never knew what a Yeezy was before doing this research, but a trainer wasn't what I immediately came to mind. Now, because of the explosive growth of this market, it drew a ton of law enforcement attention. This was really one market that absolutely needed to be shut down, due in large parts to just the massive amounts of drugs that were moving and being transacted through this market on a daily basis. So the cops kind of went to work and said, all right, we need to find out who's behind this market. There were mentions all over the site about that it was founded and designed by a guy or a person calling themselves Alpha02, right? So pseudonym Alpha02, using Tor, kind of hard, probably tails and VPNs and all that kind of stuff, right? But Alpha02 did an interview with a site called Deep.web, which we'll talk about a little bit later on, where he actually admitted to being the owner and founder. Because, again, with things on the dark web, there's just so much scamming going on that you never know when somebody says, yeah, I'm behind this or I'm not behind this, if anybody's actually telling the truth. And because of, if your OPSEC is tight, you're never going to know. So the cops, they had a target. Alpha02. They just didn't know who that really was in the real world, right? So they started ordering drugs from the market to see if they could deduce anything from the transactions themselves or the shipments. So they ordered some marijuana and some heroin and some more heroin. And then they ordered some more heroin and some more marijuana and 50 grams of meth just for good measure, right? That didn't get them anything, so they ordered some stolen driver's licenses and ATM skimmers, but nothing came out of any of this. And it wasn't until they decided to register an account on the discussion forum that they caught a bit of a break. So a lot of these markets, there's really kind of two parts. There's the market itself, and you can register an account there, and you can see what's going on, what the ads are, and purchase something if you want. You can become a vendor as well. And then there's the discussion forums, and that's just kind of a wild west of mostly dealing with support issues. So if you go on some of these forums, it's just people like, hey, I ordered from, strawberry shortcake and he never delivered my ecstasy and I'm pissed off and I had a big party this weekend and you ruined my day. And then there's moderators who try to sort of act as the go-between between the people who are making the complaints and the vendors, and they try to make everything all nice. And it's interesting. If you have a chance, go check it out. But that's really what they're there for. It's for people in the community of that market to discuss things with each other. And there's the usual, that's complaints, and then there's specific forums that are dedicated to, cocaine and marijuana and heroin. And then there's the general discussion forum where anything goes, and some of them have also really unique cultures as well. So, the feds caught a break because they registered an account on the discussion forum on Alphabay. And one of the features of the sign-up process was that a new user had to provide an email address for password recovery. So as you sign up, you say, okay, here's my email address. And then the system would send you an automated email acknowledging that you registered. And when the feds looked into the headers of the email, they basically found this address over here, pimpalex91@hotmail.com. So the feds called up Microsoft and said, who owns this account? And it turns out it was a Canadian by the name of Alex Kaz, whose birthday was 19 October 1991. His LinkedIn profile indicated that he was a software designer based in Quebec that worked at a company called EBX Technologies, a company that, upon further investigation and digging, they learned that he actually just owned and controlled. EBX Technologies was just a front company. It wasn't particularly productive. He was using this company to launder money through. I mean, the website at the time was interesting. It had a lot of things like, blog posts and data sheets and solutions that they had. Well, this is all in French, but you got the software, the portfolio, you've got the services that they have. He spent a lot of time putting this together, to try to make it look like it was a real company. But when they started looking into things like taxation records for the company, they found that it really wasn't taking in much money. There was a lot of money moving through the company, but there wasn't really much coming in terms of things like sales. So, they also found mentions of both the Hotmail address and an EBX Technologies address associated with a PayPal account. So now they're starting to see some of the pieces kind of line up a little bit, right? And then further digging leads us to a post on a French computer help forum. It's kind of like a Stack Overflow, but for French-speaking citizens in Canada, by a user calling himself Alpha02. Okay, might have been a coincidence, sure. Could have been somebody else using this pseudonym. If it hadn't been for the fact that Alex Cause gave his email address to the forum as pimpalex91 at hotmail.com and actually registered at Alpha02. As a matter of fact, this is a Wayback Machine screenshot, but they've since scrubbed that site of the actual sign-off that was down here that said, Alex Cause and pimpalex91 at hotmail.com. So for whatever reason, the people on this site decided to scrub the mention of it. And then just like, we all do is when we have an email address we want to know a bit more information about, we stick it into haveibeenpwned.com and see what happens, right? And sure enough, like even cyber criminals are not immune to being part of breaches. He used this address all over the place, including at the very top here, 000 web host, which is it's a known repository for basically shady web scripts, right? So if you've got a shady web script that scrapes, crypto coins out of your Bitcoin wallets, then you probably can find it, post it here, and somebody can download it and use it. All right. Ironically, I mentioned that Deep.web interview that he did earlier. He bragged about his OPSEC, saying how tight it was. So, the feds, they had their man now. They just had to spring the trap. Now, around that same time period, we had Hansa, which was another market that was getting a lot of attention, both from the users of the site. It was growing quite rapidly in terms of the membership, but also of law enforcement. So like Alpha Bay and many of the other markets, it dealt in all sorts of illegal goods and services, including drugs, counterfeit items, stolen digital information. There's the thing with the Netflix accounts, Spotify accounts. Again, this is where phishing ends up, right? The credentials very often end up here. And then one day, in late 2016, a security researcher discovered something interesting. He was trolling around the web, doing the regular security researcher thing, and he noticed on the clear web there was what appeared to be a development server for Hansa Market. So because the server was being hosted in the Netherlands, the researcher contacted the Dutch police and the Dutch High-Tech Crimes Unit, the HTCU, quickly got a warrant and installed some network monitoring equipment in the data center where the server was located, because they wanted to sort of see what was happening on the wire and see where that traffic, going to and from the server, was either originating from or going to. To their surprise, they found that this development server was very chatty, and it was communicating with some Tor-protected nodes in the same data center that was hosting Hansa's live site, as well as some other servers in Germany. So the HTCU, they immediately made a copy of each server's hard drive that they could get their hands on, which included every single transaction record that had been processed through Hansa up to that point, as well as the entire conversation history from its anonymized chat system. Now, since all the conversations were using pseudonyms, and it wasn't really possible to then match the identities in the chats with the real life identities, much like Alpha02. We had that problem earlier. But there was another huge OPSEC mistake, because as the Dutch police were combing through the logs, they found that both of the admins' full names and the home address of one of them appeared at a very, very, very old chat. So in the beginnings of the market, kind of when they were setting stuff up. So they basically doxed themselves at that point to the police. So because these servers were in Germany, they approached the German police and said, okay, we've got these two guys we're interested in. Can you go and, knock on their door and have them arrested and extradited? And the Germans said, oh, we know who those guys are. We're already looking at them. So it turns out these two were already under investigation for running a site in Germany called lul.to. It was selling pirated books, audiobooks, MP3s. And so the Dutch had an idea here. They thought, well, maybe we can use the arrest of these two guys as sort of a smoke screen for their involvement in this particular site, for a smoke screen for the operation that we want to launch. And unfortunately, as the Dutch were planning this and getting ready to spring the final trap, everything went dark. Signals gone. Okay. So the assumption is that the Hansa admins had actually noticed the hard drive copies, panicked and then acted quickly to take their servers and move them to some other Tor-protected location. So now the HTCU's got nothing. They don't know, they know who the individuals are, but they don't know where this stuff's gone, and they need more evidence, right? So it was, back to analyzing the chat logs. Now, luck was on their side again, because in April of 2017, they found a Bitcoin wallet address buried in one of the chats. When they took that Bitcoin address and chucked it into some fancy blockchain analysis software, they discovered that a payment was made through a provider located in the Netherlands. And using a warrant in the Netherlands, they then discovered that that payment was made to a hosting company in Lithuania. So with another warrant and a little bit of multilateral cooperation, they went to Lithuania and found the server once again. So it wasn't long after this second break that the FBI notified the HTCU. These guys talk internally about the operations that they're doing sometimes. The FBI told the HTCU that they had found the servers hosting Alphabet and were planning to take them down. So this gave the Dutch police another idea. If Alphabet was shut down, it was the big dog at the time, right? Users would have to go somewhere. And as has happened so many times in the past, they kind of go to the next biggest market, which in this case happened to be Hansa. So they just assumed that, hey, if Alphabet goes down, everybody moves to Hansa. So on 20 June 2017, the Dutch police sent a couple of agents off to Lithuania, to the data center, while the German police were on their way to arrest the two administrators. So in one of these carefully coordinated, synchronize your watches raids, they were able to arrest the pair while they were actually at their keyboards and their computers were unlocked and encrypted. So that was great. Meanwhile, in Lithuania, the Dutch police immediately began migrating the Hansa code from that server over to another server under their control in a data center in the Netherlands. And under questioning in Germany, the two admins just finally said, yep, it was us. They handed over all the keys, all the credentials, everything that they had associated with the site. But the crucial thing here is there was no downtime and no one noticed a thing, any of the users' vendors on the Hansa site. It was just business as usual. And with all the pieces in place, this is how we got Operation Bayonet. Just a play on words of Alphabet and Internet, basically. So on 5 July 2017, the FBI, with the help of authorities in Canada and Thailand, shut down Alphabet. The Canadian RCMP, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, took down the servers which were being hosted in Montreal, and the Thai police arrested Alex Kaz at one of his many residences, this case one in Bangkok. The Thai police, for their part, used, and this is one of his homes, used an unmarked car to fake an accident outside his home. So he lives in a gated property here. And so what happened was one of the undercover officers used this car to purposely smash into his gate to cause a commotion. A bunch of other undercover officers came kind of running out, posing as, neighbors, yelling and screaming, and they were just trying to make a ruckus so that he could come outside, right? But it wasn't working. So they backed up the car and ran into the gate once again and just caused even more of a commotion. And so finally, he noticed, and he came outside and came down the stairs, and apparently at the time he was, shirtless, wearing shorts and flip-flops, and had a cell phone in his hands. And that's when the cops rushed him, pinned him to the ground, took his cell phone, and then immediately another set went up the stairs to his office where he was, again, logged into his computer, so it was unlocked, and he was actually logged into the Alphabet admin portal because he was trying to figure out, why are the servers in Montreal going down? Meanwhile, in the Netherlands, the Dutch police had been fiddling with the code on Hansa. They rewrote the site's code so that it would no longer store passwords as hashes, but just as plain text instead. So anybody who knew who registered would have their passwords stored in plain text. They also made a change to the messaging system so that all messages would get copied in plain text before they got PGP encrypted and sent off to the recipient. So that helped you sort of capture buyers' home, like physical home addresses, because they would say, I live at this address. This is where you need to send my cocaine, right? They also removed a feature that stripped out metadata in pictures that, tags, by default, most pictures get tagged with GPS coordinates, and you can turn that off if you want, but that's usually a opt-out, not opt-in feature. And so they stripped that code, and then they basically staged a server glitch saying, we lost a bunch of pictures, and they just deleted them, and said, you need to re-upload your pictures, dear vendors, you need to re-upload your pictures. And they were just trying to get as much geolocation data as possible. And most often, these are just pictures people take in their own homes, right? So the simple little action netted them 50 dealers. And then finally, they tricked some of the sellers into downloading a booby-trapped Excel file that was posing as a backup key for their profiles. And when they opened them, what it did is it just basically pinged a clear web address. So now they were able to get their clear addresses, not their Tor protected addresses. And then this got them another 64 targets. Shutting down Alphabet had the desired effect. More than 5,000 users were registering on Hansa every single day. This is a notice that they put up because a week after the news broke that Alphabet had been raided by the police, the influx of new users was just so large that the police-controlled Hansa, they just had to shut it down. They couldn't accept new registrations anymore. And again, doing the research for these things, I was just, periodically, I just jump on the dark web, see what's up, see what's going on. And I noticed this, so I took a screenshot, not knowing I was going to use it for a talk later on. But, due to the influx of Alphabet refugees, which is apparently what they call these things, we're dealing with technical issues. We've temporarily stopped new registrations. Unfortunately for the cops, Dutch law states that they had to track and report every single transaction that was going through Hansa to Europol. And with about 1,000 transactions per day occurring on Hansa at the time, the paperwork is basically just getting completely unmanageable. And after 27 days, the Dutch finally gave up and pulled the plug on the site entirely. So if you can imagine that, 1,000 orders per day that they had to then, get the old form in triplicate and fill out all the details and enter that into evidence. It was a bit much. So the results were pretty staggering. The police had obtained data, because of this operation, they obtained data on about 420,000 users, including 100,000 home addresses, which were turned over to Europol and police agencies worldwide. And they also seized about 12 million US dollars worth of bitcoins. Following this operation, the police in various countries did a bunch of what they call knock and talk, basically knocking on the door of 420,000 users. They kind of went, hey, we know you bought some stuff in the past, clean up your act kind of thing. We're going to look away this time, but don't do it again. By the time it was seized, Alphabet had over 370,000 listings on the site, 400,000 members, and was trading anywhere from 600 to 800,000 US dollars per day. In its heyday, Silk Road had only 13,000 listings on the site. So you can imagine just the orders of magnitude that growth that this market had achieved. And it's estimated that Alphabet grossed over $1 billion in the roughly 2 years that it was active. At the time, Alex was living the high life. He had, several properties. If you read the forfeiture document, which is the piece where it lists the asset, is like 5 pages long. It lists, several luxury properties, including this particular villa here in Thailand. There was a time where you could actually rent this for vacations. I went to the site recently, and that's no longer available for rent. But if you were a vacationer, you could go to Thailand, and while he wasn't there, you could rent his luxury villa for however long you wanted. Premium luxury villa. He was also an economic citizen, which what that means is he would look around the world and see, well, where can I get citizenship simply by investing money, and usually it's in the form of real estate. So depending on the country, some it's only a couple €100,000. Some countries it's a couple million. So he's kind of spreading money around, trying to get economic citizenship in as many of the countries that I guess he fancied as possible. Distribute his wealth a little bit. Don't have all your eggs in one basket. If only he had been at my Bsides talk in London last year, where I talked about being a cyber criminal on the web. he would have learned to stay away from countries that have extradition treaties with the U.S. Because when you're a cyber criminal or when you're a criminal and you're in any one of these blue countries and you do crimes against American citizens or American companies, they will come after you if they know who you are. And that's really how a lot of these guys get arrested, is by, they make a pile of cash, ransomwaring a bunch of machines, and then they feel that they've worked so hard they earn a holiday, so they go down to Ibiza, and then the cops find them and pop them. So in addition to his many real estate properties, the police also seized 10 luxury cars, including this beautiful Lamborghini Aventador LP700. And Alex actually kept a spreadsheet on his computer where he tracked his own net worth in terms of, Bitcoin, cash in different currencies, real estate properties, assets like cars, expensive jewelry, fancy luxury goods, all that kind of stuff. He kept track of all this, and he estimated his own net worth, and it was sort of corroborated by police at about $23 million. So, not bad. Not great, but not bad if you're, just sitting on your butt collecting commission off a bunch of drug transactions. Now, unfortunately, the good news of taking this market down was somewhat tainted. While awaiting his extradition to the U.S., Alex Kaz hung himself in his Bangkok jail cell. So you can only imagine, he was a pretty young guy. And, he was married. They had just been married fairly recently. And when your world comes crashing down, sometimes things like this happen. So it's unfortunate for Alex, but, at least the market's shut down and people can stay a little bit safer now. So, with Alphabet and Hansa gone, it was time for Dream now to basically step up. They were the third guy in line, right? So, by all accounts, Dream had inherited basically all the refugee community from both of these markets to emerge as the leading Darknet market at the time. So back in March, when I started putting together just the research and looking at the outline and thinking, okay, how am I going to tell this story, right? Because Operation Bayonet had already happened, and Dream was just doing just stellar business. It was doing gangbusters business. I thought, this could be a good story, and I could talk about what Dream is doing and the kinds of things that they've been up to. And so I was doing my regular rounds of going, okay, what's on Dream these days? Are there fun things that we can find on Dream? And I saw this notice, which said that the market's going to get shut down on 30 April of 2019. It's going to transfer the services to another partner company. Now, this was big news on the dark web because nobody had a clue really what was going on. There was wild rumors and speculations on many of the forums stating that Speedstepper, which is the alleged owner and operator of this site, had either been arrested or he was just exit scamming, which, both of those are fairly common and fairly, they're used to that. So, but a bunch of people vouched for him and said, no, take this at its word. It would all be fine. Don't worry about it. Just sit tight. And, but curiously, unlike most of the messages that usually come from site administrators and Speedstepper himself, this message was not actually signed by Speedstepper. So this kind of fueled the conspiracy theories that maybe the cops had him, but they didn't have access to his key, so they just popped a message out there. And during this particular period of time, Dream continued to stay up, but all the products were gone. So you could log into the site, but there were no ads anymore. And you could look at your account and, do all sorts of other things, but there's no product to buy anymore. Now, apparently you could still withdraw your Bitcoins because there was stuff stuck in escrow at the time, from your account, but a bunch of users complained that they either couldn't withdraw or they couldn't withdraw all of their Bitcoins at a time, or there was just some weirdness happening with the withdrawal system. And then 30 April came and went, and the site was still up, and it was showing the same message. Now, in early May, a post on Reddit, which if you're not familiar with that, is it's kind of like the dark web's equivalent to Reddit, attempted to kind of set the record straight. It turns out that Dream had been on the receiving end of a sustained 7-week DDoS attack, and the attackers were simply demanding a $400,000 ransom. Now, DDoS attacks on the Tor network are not new. They happen all the time, and darknet markets are very often the targets of these because of their high profile, because of the service that they provide to the dark web, a lot of people find them necessary, and therefore taking down a darknet market upsets people, and they want it back up. Now, the thing is that there's systemic issues with the protocol itself that allows DDoS attacks to occur and be amplified, and it can't easily be mitigated by the site administrators. It actually needs like code changes to the Tor protocol itself. And what's interesting is a bunch of these dark web operators and site operators actually started crowdfunding sources to the Tor project to fix this one particular bug so that they wouldn't be victims to DDoS attacks. But it seems that instead of giving up and paying the ransom, the Dream admin or admins decided to shut down the site, improve the site's code, and then relaunch bigger and better than before. Shortly after that, a different notice appeared on the market saying that it would be back in August. And then an accompanying post, again on Reddit, confirmed the same thing. Now, as of today, all the Dream mirrors, they've gone offline. You can't access any of them. There were a lot of them. And the true fate of the site is still unknown. I keep trolling Reddit and the specific, whichever one you want, subdread that is the Dream Market subdread, and they're still posting by, the Riddick and the one before that, I can't remember his name, but they are still saying, yes, it's coming, but we still haven't seen anything yet, and that address that we saw in the very first notice, that the partner site, is not up yet. And so I was kind of here with an unfinished talk now because I had nothing to talk about anymore about Dream, and that's when I caught a bit of a break because law enforcement came and gave me a hand. Along with the Dream Market, Wall Street Market and Valhalla were the other two. So, Alpha Bay Hansa go away, Dream gets promoted, and then Wall Street and Valhalla become sort of the next large and well-trafficked markets out there. And on the morning of 2 May, I woke up to this notice. The German National Police had seized Wall Street Market, and Finnish Customs and French police had seized Valhalla. So this again rocked the Darknet community, and there was panic in the proverbial dark web streets. Now, only 5 days later, the FBI, not wanting to be left out of the fun, seized the extremely popular dark web news site Deep.web. Now, it's easy to understand why Wall Street and Valhalla went down, but why Deep.web? Prior to being shut down, Deep.web was a news site that dealt with all things dark web, but focused on darknet activity. Deep.web was not only a news site, but it also served, amongst other things, as a portal to darknet markets. It had a sidebar that listed the many popular markets at the time and their availability. So if we look at the top, you got the top market was Dream at the time with a 98.54% availability. And you can see some of the other markets that are maybe more focused. There's vendor shops. So a vendor shop compared to a market is the markets have multiple vendors. The vendor shops are run by one vendor. And then you've got discussion forums and non-English country specific sites. And then sometimes they had these categories changed a little bit. Sometimes they had other stuff in there as well. It also had referral links on each one of these markets, and a little bit of information and what you could get there. So this was the bridge between the clear web and the dark web. But it still doesn't really explain why the site was shut down, which left a lot of people, kind of scratching their heads, both on, the Reddit and all over the place. As part of the press release, the FBI published a handy infographic which explained why what they were doing was illegal. The Deep.web admins would create an account on all of the markets listed on their site. They would then publish that referral link, as we saw, on the Deep.web, and then promote those sites, and they would promote the market itself, they would promote on their site, they would promote their site, Deep.web, on other sites, and just basically promote the hell out of everything all over the place. Users who would subsequently use that referral link to open their own account, let's say on Hansa or Alpha Bay, and proceeded to buy goods and services, would then basically be using that referral link as a way to sort of thank the deep.web admins, because it turns out that the deep.web admins were receiving a percentage of all the transactions that those users subsequently produced in perpetuity. So basically, they would take the money, and then finally they would launder the money they had through a bunch of shell companies that the two individuals behind deep.web controlled. Now, according to the indictment again, deep.web's referral link was associated with nearly 24% of all Alphabet transactions and 47% of all Hansa transactions. The admins themselves received over $15 million in kickbacks and from the various Darknet markets. And I believe this is what most law enforcement and agencies call the proceeds of crime, right? I also believe that this is probably the first time that a clear web site was taken down just for containing things like information and referral links. Now, interestingly, a couple of very, very similar sites to deep.web have since disappeared off the clear web. So I guess people are taking notice and doing business a little bit differently these days. So, like many of their predecessors, a slew of OPSEC, operational security mistakes, were to blame for the takedowns of both Wall Street and Valhalla. Now, unfortunately, we still can't find much public information on Valhalla, but I'm willing to bet several pints of bitter that it's probably an OPSEC fail. This is generally the way that these things turn out, and that's probably what was central to that bust as well. It doesn't take much to bring your criminal empire crumbling down. The deep.web indictment identified two gentlemen, Tal Prihar and Michael Phan, as the admins of the site. Now, how the police got there was simply a matter of following money and a little bit of open source intelligence. Actually, I think there's an OSINT CTF later on today, so if you're interested in that kind of stuff, go participate. Now, by watching certain wallets, they were able to identify which companies were being used as shell companies to transfer money, and then something as simple as a company lookup on LinkedIn would have identified who the individuals were. So they found the company first by following the money, and then a LinkedIn search said, well, there's Tal and Michael. So Tal Prihar was the owner at OTSR BizTech and MNT Market Limited. And then Michael Phan was the owner of Jazz Coffee Trade Limited. If you look at Michael Phan's Facebook profile, you can see that he also claims ownership, in addition to the coffee shop, of MNT Marketing. The authorities had identified OTSR and MNT as two of the companies that were actually being used to launder the money. So basically, starting with some shell companies, following the money, it led to the real-life identities of these two individuals. Another good example is the story of a senior Dream Market admin who was arrested in the U.S. on his way to a beard-growing competition. Oxymonster. What's that? I can't hear you. Oh, I'm pretty sure that's not an Onion headline. I've read the indictment. His identity, Oxymonster was a prominent member of the Dream community, as well as also being a former admin. He was also a vendor. That's why he was called himself Oxymonster. And his identity was actually pieced together by analyzing public Instagram and Twitter posts of an individual by the name of Gal Valerius, and then comparing those posts with those made by Dreamform admins, and specifically tying to this Dreamform admin called Oxymonster. Where it actually really started to go wrong for him was when the feds were able to associate one of the Bitcoin wallet addresses used as a tip jar on Dream Market with an individual by the name of Gal Valerius. Now, a tip jar is something that gets used in dark web and by dark web vendors and the dark web community, basically just for vendors to receive bitcoins from satisfied customers. So if you like their service, you give them a couple extra shekels, and off they go. And on 31 August, he was detained and questioned in Atlanta on his way to the competition in Texas. The indictment indicated that during the search of his laptop, login creds for Dream and an encryption key tied to Oxymonster were found on his laptop. And it's like these guys have never heard of Tails. They keep using their own laptops for both their criminal and public activities. So Gal Valerius was tried and subsequently found guilty, that's how we know, of distributing drugs and sentenced to 20 years in an orange jumpsuit in the USA. Pretty sick beard though, right?
Did he win the competition?
He didn't get there.
What was Deep Dark Web?
Pardon me?
What was Deep Dark Web?
They were, money laundering and then basically proceeds of crime, essentially, right? Because they were paid by money that was gained through selling drugs, right? Now, as of April of this year, Wall Street Market was one of the larger darknet markets out there. It had 5,400 vendors, over 1 million customers. It was one of the many places where you could get yourself some Donald Trump ecstasy, along with a raft of other illegal goods. And like the other markets, they took a cut. That their whole transaction model was taking a cut, anywhere from 2 to 5%, depending on the vendor's status or rating. So if you're a vendor of high status and rating, you got a less. They took less of a cut of your transactions. And aside from all the obvious reasons why this market would come under scrutiny by law enforcement, it's the allegation that drugs sold on this market specifically were directly responsible for the death of a Florida resident. Wall Street was also apparently the successor of German Plaza Market, which Exit scammed back in 2016. So by using some fancy blockchain analysis, the federal agents were able to follow the money and establish that money from the wallets associated with the previous German Plaza Market were used to fund the operations of Wall Street in order to buy things like advertising and marketing services. Now, since this bust is relatively still new, the details haven't all emerged, but again, we've got some indictments that we can sift through that give us some clues as to how the three men behind Wall Street were actually identified. The police discovered several servers thought to be those belonging to Wall Street, imaged them, and then started analyzing the images for clues. There weren't any immediate smoking guns, but the cops were able to get some pseudonyms from the code that would later be associated with the defendants. Now, if you're going to use a pseudonym, don't reuse that on the clear web. Don't be stupid. The authorities were also able to analyze some network traffic and get additional clues. In this case, one defendant's VPN connection betrayed him when it would drop and then unmask his real IP address while he was actively using the Wall Street Market administration portal and the Wall Street Market infrastructure. It turns out that the IP address was associated with a mobile UMTS device that was registered, albeit with a fictitious name, but surveillance of that stick, so good old-fashioned police work, revealed that it was used by one of the defendants at both his home and his place of work. Another of the Wall Street Market administrators had his VPN service registered in the name of his mother. Poor mother. So they just basically went to her house and knocked on the door and questioned, "Oh, that's my son, yes." And then this admin later admitted that, his role in running Wall Street Market. And meanwhile, analysis of the images continued and turned up some PGP keys. They found that those PGP keys were associated with a wallet that was used to pay for, again, some digital marketing services, right? Some ads, maybe on Deep.web, who knows? And the same PGP key was also found associated with a wallet of a Hansa user, and the monikers used in the various locations basically all traced back to the same user. Further blockchain analysis indicated, these guys use a lot of blockchain analysis. I guess it's not as anonymous as some people think. Indicated that other wallets associated with this particular user were all somehow associated with the same email address down here, klaus-martinfrost@web.de. What makes the WSM case even more interesting is the fact that the three admins were planning an exit scam. In late April, this message appeared on the site. So apparently the site was going to go down for maintenance and would be back shortly. It never came up. Law enforcement noticed, and so did others. So law enforcement was like, we need to step up on these guys because something's happening. But if you went to Reddit, there was the Hug Bunter, who's the alleged owner and runner of Reddit, basically said, if you're living under a rock and you haven't noticed, like, Wall Street market is exit scamming. As a matter of fact, the big story right now on Reddit is that Nightmare Market, the one I mentioned earlier. They are also apparently allegedly exit scamming, although the market as of yesterday is still up and apparently processing transactions. And then it's this thing down here about law enforcement having access to the IP address of the panel. Like, what was that all about? Well, shortly after the site went into maintenance, another interesting post appeared on Reddit, which it seemed like someone using the username of Medellin had leaked the credentials to the Wall Street Market admin panel. Well, who could have done it and why? Well, more indictments to read. This one is a treasure trove of OPSEC failure. Reading this indictment, you kind of almost feel bad for this individual. He was a Wall Street Market mod and a subreddit mod. He spoke English and Portuguese. And interestingly, he actually interacted with the Dutch police on Hansa during Operation Bayonet. As a matter of fact, here's part of the conversation from the indictment where he's chatting with the police, and they were basically trying to get information out of him. So he was trying to get a job with them as a forum mod, and they were trying to get information like, where do you live and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, well, we need to exchange secure information. So they're like, well, we'll send you a key. So what's your address, right? They want to send like a key fob, right? He's like, oh, the postal system in Brazil is really slow. I'll probably never get it by the time all this stuff sorts out. So eventually, they convinced him to give them his home address, which turned out to be an address in Campinas province in Brazil. Further digging into the indictment reveals even more fun stuff. So he had this page here that had, a website link. It had his key-based proof. It had GitHub accounts, Twitter accounts. If you look at his GitHub account, it says, it's associated with somebody called Coins of Pixel. He had a personalized Bitcoin address as well that was on his website, which is no longer in operation. But it was, marcosanibali.com had a personalized Bitcoin address that started one Marcos. Didn't make much money with that one, apparently. His Reddit account uses the same Twitter name as Twitter. And here's the key-based proof from earlier on his Twitter account. He had an MSDN account as well, with a picture of Marco Sanibali, right? And coinsofpixel.com as his website. And for good measure, he had Flickr and Discuss accounts using the name Marcos Anibali on both of them. What I thought was particularly clever is that the federal agent in the indictment talked about one of the ways that he kind of basically sealed the deal on who this guy was, because as they were going through the chat logs, they found a discussion discussing a particular book called Gomorrah. He was discussing this with another enthusiast of that same author, saying, hey, have you read this book? Yeah, I've got it. I've read it. So Marco's saying, yeah, I've got the book. I've read it. But have you read his other book as well? And this is actually a photo from his employment profile at a former company. And so the Fed noticed the book Gomorrah back there, and he's like, that's got to be him. With all the overwhelming evidence, that's got to be him. And then finally, just like the rest of us, he too ended up in a password dump, this time for the Steam platform, with the username of Marco Sanibali and the password of Campinas000. So, where do we stand now? Continuous cooperation between the researcher community and law enforcement is doing some good. Like, we are winning some of these battles if we continue to research and do good work and bring these guys down. They are taking harm off the street. Regardless of how you feel about the products, they are taking harm off the street, especially some of them that are still selling things like fentanyl. And so it's a good news, bad news story. But just remember this, bad OPSEC will always bring you down. So regardless of why you feel the need to keep your identities private on the web, whether you're doing good things or bad things on the dark web, on the clear web, for goodness sake, don't mix them up. Thank you.